I never imagined my life would spiral into such chaos. Looking back, there were signs, subtle shifts in her demeanor, fleeting moments of silence where there used to be warmth. Yet I ignored them. Perhaps I didn't want to see the cracks forming in the foundation of what I thought was an unshakable bond. My name is Daniel Grayson. I'm 38 years old, a finance consultant by trade, and, until recently, a man who believed in the sanctity of commitment. Claire, my wife of 10 years, had always been the axis upon which my world turned. Her laughter was once my favorite melody, her touch the grounding force after long, grueling days. But now, as I sit here in the dim light of our living room, nursing a tumbler of whiskey that burns more than it soothes, I feel nothing but the cold sting of betrayal. The truth came to me in whispers, a text message left open on her phone, carelessly discarded on the kitchen counter. I wasn't searching for it. I'd only meant to silence the incessant pinging. Jason, can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. The air felt like it had been punched out of my lungs. My hands trembled as I reread the message, hoping against hope that I'd misunderstood. But the words were unambiguous, each one a dagger to the heart. For a moment, I stood there frozen, staring at the phone as if it might offer some explanation. Then came the flood of emotions, disbelief, anger, sadness, and worst of all, a gnawing sense of inadequacy. How long has this been going on? Who is Jason? What did I do to deserve this? I put the phone down carefully, as if it were made of glass, and walked away. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I needed time to think. Rushing in, confronting her then and there would only give her the upper hand. No, I needed to approach this strategically. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message, those words etched into my mind like a scar. The betrayal, the lies, the audacity of it all churned in my gut. But beneath the searing anger there was something colder, sharper, clarity. This wasn't just about what Claire had done, it was about how I would respond. The first step in any plan is reconnaissance. I started observing her, carefully, subtly, not in a way that would arouse suspicion, but enough to confirm my worst fears. It didn't take long. Her phone habits changed. Always face down, always within arm's reach. She started working late more frequently, coming home with excuses that felt rehearsed. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I made it a point to act as though nothing had changed. I was the same loving, attentive husband. I kissed her cheek when she walked through the door, asked about her day, even cooked dinner. Every moment felt like a performance, a charade I played with gritted teeth. But beneath the surface, I was preparing. The second step was intelligence. Jason. That name haunted me. Who was he? What gave him the gall to encroach on my marriage? Began with her phone, memorizing his number from the message and running it through every reverse lookup tool I could find. His name was Jason Miller, a fitness trainer at a boutique gym downtown, a fitness trainer. Of course, he was younger than me, mid-30s judging by his social media. His profile was filled with shirtless photos, motivational captions, and nauseating comments from thirsty followers. I scrolled through every post, my jaw tightening with every glimpse into his world. Claire had liked more than a few of his pictures. The third step was laying the groundwork. I needed allies, or at least people who could corroborate my story when the time came. That's where Laura, my sister, came in. She was sharp, pragmatic, and fiercely protective of me. When I told her what I'd discovered, she didn't try to sugarcoat it. "Claire's a fool," she said bluntly, her hazel eyes narrowing in anger. "But don't let this break you, Danny. You're better than that." "I'm not broken," I replied, though the words felt hollow. "I'm focused, and I need your help." Laura leaned in, her expression serious. What's the plan? Over the next few weeks, I began to document everything. I hired a private investigator, an older man named Frank, who had seen it all. He was discreet and thorough, tailing Claire on her late nights and confirming her rendezvous with Jason. He provided me with photos, timestamps, and even a recording of one of their meetings. Seeing those images, Claire laughing, touching, his arm, her face alight with a joy she hadn't shown me in months, was like twisting the knife deeper into an already gaping wound. But it also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. When I was ready, I began to set the stage. Claire's birthday was approaching, and I decided to throw her a party. Not a grand affair, just a small gathering of close friends and family at our home. She seemed surprised when I suggested it, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Relief? Are you sure? She asked, her voice cautious. Of course, I replied with a smile. It's been a while since we've celebrated properly. You deserve it. She kissed me then, a fleeting gesture that felt hollow, but it didn't matter. This party would be the perfect opportunity. The day of the party arrived, and I played the perfect host. Friends mingled, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. Claire glowed under the attention, her smile radiant as she moved through the crowd. And then, when the moment was right, I made my move. Everyone, I said, raising my glass. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate Claire. She's an incredible woman, and I'm lucky to call her my wife. Claire's cheeks flushed, and she smiled at me, her expression unreadable. But tonight, I continued, my voice steady, I'd like to share something special with all of you. A little surprise for Claire. I picked up the remote for the TV and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, displaying a slideshow of photos and videos. At first, they were innocuous, pictures of us, memories from happier times. But then, the images shifted. Claire and Jason sitting together in a dimly lit cafe. Claire leaning into him, her hand on his chest. The kiss. The room fell silent. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel, what is this? I turned to her, my expression calm. It's the truth, Claire. Something I thought our friends and family deserved to know. The silence in the room was deafening. Every pair of eyes shifted from the screen to Claire, then to me, and back again. Claire's face had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing like she was grasping for words that refused to come. I set the remote down deliberately, my movements slow and controlled. Inside, my heart pounded like a war drum, but I refused to let it show. This was my moment, and I wouldn't falter. Daniel, can we talk about this privately? Claire stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head, studying her like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. Privately? I repeated as though the word were foreign. Were you concerned about privacy when you were meeting Jason? A ripple of murmurs passed through the room, our friends and family exchanging shocked glances. Laura, standing by the doorway, crossed her arms and gave Claire a look so sharp it could have cut glass. Daniel, please, Claire tried again, tears welling in her eyes. I should have felt something then, pity, anger, maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was a hollow sense of inevitability, as though this moment had been written in the stars long before either of us realized it. You don't get to cry, I said, my voice low but firm. Not here, not now. Jason wasn't there, of course. He was smarter than that, or maybe just cowardly, but his absence didn't matter. The room had already judged Claire, and the verdict was clear. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. A friend of hers, perhaps, trying to diffuse the tension. But Laura beat them to it, stepping forward with the kind of commanding presence that made people listen. You've humiliated my brother, lied to his face, and destroyed the trust he placed in you," she said, her tone icy. "The least you can do is own up to it." Claire's tears spilled over then, and she turned to me, desperation etched into every line of her face. "Daniel, I made a mistake. I was lonely. You were always so busy with work, and I didn't know how to talk to you about how I felt. A mistake." She called it a mistake. I laughed then, a bitter, humorless sound. "A mistake," I echoed. "One night might have been a mistake, Claire. But weeks, months, that's not a mistake, that's a choice." The party didn't last much longer. People began to leave in awkward, uncomfortable waves, offering me sympathetic nods and quiet words of support. Claire disappeared into the bedroom. At some point, and I let her, when the last guest was gone, Laura stayed behind helping me clean up. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a trash bag. I nodded, though the truth was far more complicated. "I will be," I said. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "Maybe," I replied, tossing empty cups into the bag. "But it doesn't feel like it." That night, Claire tried to talk to me. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "Daniel," she began, her voice small. "I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust, but I want to fix this. Please, can we fix this?" I looked at her then, really looked at her. This was the woman I'd once loved more than anything, the woman I'd built a life with. And yet, standing there, she felt like a stranger. "I don't know if we can," I said honestly. Her face crumpled, and she stepped closer, reaching for me. But I stepped back, the space between us now an unbridgeable chasm. "Good night, Claire," I said, turning away. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild. Not the marriage, there was no saving that, but myself. I filed for divorce, met with my lawyer, and began untangling the life we'd built together. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger returned, white-hot and searing, threatening to consume me. But there were also moments of clarity, of peace, as I realized that her betrayal didn't define me. Claire begged for forgiveness, even tried to make amends, but the trust was gone, and without it, there was no foundation to rebuild upon. And Jason? I never confronted him directly. He wasn't worth my energy. In the end, revenge wasn't about humiliating Claire in front of our friends. It wasn't even about exposing the truth. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self. As I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the city skyline, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. This wasn't the ending I'd envisioned when I said my vows. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better. A different wife. A familiar betrayal. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the windows, a hypnotic soundtrack to the unraveling of my life. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope in my hands, the one I had found tucked beneath the passenger seat of her car. I shouldn't have opened it. A part of me still wishes I hadn't. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, a gnawing instinct I'd ignored for too long, compelled me. Inside were 2 concert tickets for a show I didn't recognize. The date was last Friday, a night she'd told me she was working late. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were for a friend. Maybe she'd bought them months ago and forgotten about them. But the handwriting scrawled across the envelope, "Can't wait for our next adventure. XO." Shattered any illusions I tried to cling to. I replayed the moments leading up to this discovery in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed. Sophia and I had been married for 8 years. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Tall, with chestnut hair that cascaded down her back in loose waves and piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through you. But it wasn't just her looks that captivated me. It was her wit, her charm, the way she made the mundane feel magical. Lately, though, something had changed. She'd grown distant, her laughter coming less easily, her kisses feeling more like routine than passion. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Her career as an interior designer often demanded long hours and demanding clients. But now, with this envelope in hand, those excuses felt like lies I'd told myself to avoid facing the truth. I didn't confront her immediately. Like before, I needed more. Over the next week, I watched her closely, my every interaction tinged with suspicion. Her phone buzzed more often now, her face lighting up with a smile she quickly tried to hide. When I asked her about her day, her answers felt rehearsed, as if she'd anticipated my questions and crafted careful responses. Then came Thursday. She'd claimed she was meeting a client downtown, an elderly couple renovating their dream home. Something about her tone set my nerves on edge, and as she kissed my cheek and grabbed her keys, I made a decision. I waited 5 minutes before following her. Trailing someone you love is a surreal experience. Every part of you hopes to be wrong, to find nothing but evidence of their innocence. But with every turn she took, every mile that passed, my hope began to erode. She didn't go downtown. Instead, she drove to a quiet restaurant on the edge of the city, a place we'd never been to together. I parked a block away and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. A man arrived 10 minutes later, tall, with sandy blonde hair and an easy smile. He kissed her cheek as she greeted him, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that felt far too familiar. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of them together played on a loop in my mind, her laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel mockery. When she came home hours later, I pretended to be asleep, my breathing steady and my back turned to her. The next morning, I made my move. "Sophia," I began over breakfast, my tone casual. "How was the meeting with the clients last night?" She hesitated just for a fraction of a second before answering. "It was good. They're leaning toward a modern farmhouse aesthetic, so I'm working on some sketches for them." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that it took everything in me not to react. "That's great," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'd love to see what you come up with." The next few days passed in a haze of pretense. Sophia went about her routine, smiling at me over cups of coffee and talking about her clients as though nothing were amiss. But every word, every glance felt like a dagger, carving away at the trust I'd once had in her. I began to gather evidence, text messages she left unlocked on her phone, receipts that didn't add up, and eventually a private investigator. It felt cold and calculated, but I needed the truth, laid bare and undeniable. What I found was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just the blonde man I'd seen her with at the restaurant. There were others. Business trips that had been more pleasure than work. Weekends away I had believed were solo retreats for her mental health. Sophia's betrayals stretched back over a year, a web of lies so intricate I couldn't believe how blind I'd been. And yet, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I planned. Sophia's birthday was a week away, and I decided it would be the stage for her reckoning. We'd planned a dinner party with friends and family, an intimate gathering at our home. She was excited, chatting endlessly about decorations, the menu, and her outfit, a sleek black dress she'd ordered online. I played the role of the loving husband to perfection, helping her with preparations, smiling at her jokes, even surprising her with flowers the night before. The party. Inside, I was a storm, but outwardly I was calm. The evening of the party arrived, and the house was alive with laughter and the clink of glasses. Sophia was radiant, the center of attention, as she entertained our guests with her usual charm. Watching her, I felt a strange mixture of anger and sadness. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, and yet she was a stranger now, someone I couldn't trust. When dessert was served, I stood up to make a toast. "To Sophia," I began, raising my glass. The most beautiful, intelligent, and complicated woman I know." She laughed lightly. Her cheeks tinged pink from the wine. "What's this about, darling?" she asked, her voice playful. I smiled, a sharp edge to it that I knew she didn't miss. "I just wanted to say how much I admire your ability to juggle so much. Your career, our home, and, of course—" I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Your extracurricular activities." The room went still. Sophia's smile faltered, her eyes darting to mine, searching for a hint of a joke. But there was none. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I pulled out a folder from beneath my chair, setting it on the table, with deliberate care. "Why don't you tell us, Sophia? Or would you prefer I do?" She stared at the folder like it was a snake poised to strike. "Daniel, let's talk about this later, privately." "No," I said firmly. "We'll talk about it now, in front of everyone." Her voice wavered as she tried to deny it, to twist the narrative, but the evidence was irrefutable. Photos, receipts, text messages, all laid bare for everyone to see. Friends and family looked on, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and discomfort. Sophia's composure crumbled, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded with me to stop. But I didn't. Not until every last piece of her deceit was exposed. When the party ended and the last guest had awkwardly excused themselves, Sophia and I were alone. She sat at the dining table, her makeup smudged and her shoulders slumped. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't know," she whispered finally. "I was bored, lonely. I don't have an excuse, Daniel. I made terrible choices." Her honesty, though painful, was like a blade, twisting in the wound. "You destroyed us," I said, my voice barely audible. "For what? A thrill?" Tears filled her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'd cried enough for both of us. The next morning, I left. I'd already packed my bags and arranged for a place to stay. Sophia begged me to stay, to give her a chance to make things right. But there was no righting this. Not for me. As I drove away, the weight on my chest began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of liberation. Sophia's betrayal had shattered me, but it had also forced me to reevaluate my life, to see the cracks I'd ignored for so long. This wasn't the end of my story, only the end of a painful chapter. And as the city skyline came into view, I found myself thinking not of Sophia, but of the future, of starting over. The journey begins, reclaiming myself. The apartment was small, barely 2 rooms with creaky hardwood floors and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, surrounded by boxes and silence, I felt a mix of sadness and something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Freedom from the lies, the second-guessing, the relentless effort to salvage a relationship that had already sunk. But freedom didn't mean peace. Not yet. The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been tethered to Sophia, her routines, her laughter, even her complaints. Now, without her, I had nothing but time and my own thoughts for company. At first, I tried to distract myself. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and volunteering for extra projects. But when the evenings came, the emptiness crept in. I'd sit on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories like a broken record. Why wasn't I enough? Did she ever love me? Or was it all a lie? How could I have been so blind? The questions gnawed at me, their weight pressing down until I felt like I couldn't breathe. One night, unable to sleep, I went for a walk. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, and the streets were quiet. I wandered aimlessly, my hands stuffed into my jacket pockets until I found myself in front of a bookstore. The sign in the window read, "Late Night Book Club, open to all." I hesitated, my breath fogging up the glass as I peered inside. The room was warm and inviting, filled with the hum of conversation and the soft rustle of pages. On a whim, I pushed the door open. That night marked the start of something I hadn't expected. Connection. The book club was discussing a novel about loss and redemption, themes that hit painfully close to home. At first, I stayed quiet, content to listen. But as the conversation deepened, I found myself speaking up, sharing my thoughts, my experiences. It wasn't easy, putting pieces of myself out there for strangers to see, but it was cathartic. One of the members, a woman named Elena, approached me after the meeting. She had kind eyes and a quiet demeanor, the sort of person who seemed to understand more than she let on. "You should come back next week," she said, her smile gentle. "You have a way of looking at things that's different. It's refreshing." In the weeks that followed, I began to carve out a new life. The book club became a regular escape, a place where I could share and learn without judgment. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years, finding solace in the rhythmic pounding of my feet against the pavement. I even reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back. Without hesitation, their laughter and camaraderie a balm to my wounded spirit. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, only to be blindsided by a memory of Sophia or a pang of loneliness. But slowly, the pain began to fade, replaced by something else. Gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons I'd learned, for the strength I'd found in myself, and for the chance to start over. One evening, months later, I returned to the bookstore. Elena was there, her smile as warm as ever. As we talked, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. It had been a nagging sensation at first, small, almost imperceptible, like a sliver of glass under the skin. I couldn't pinpoint when it started, but the little inconsistencies began piling up, the way her phone seemed glued to her hand, the sudden bursts of enthusiasm for work events she never used to care about, the way she laughed at texts and then quickly tucked her screen away when I was near. I told myself I was being paranoid. Don't let your imagination get the better of you, I'd thought. But doubt is like a seed, and once planted, it grows. The moment that shattered my trust came on a Saturday morning. She'd left her phone charging in the kitchen while she went to take a shower, a rare lapse in her newfound vigilance. I wasn't proud of what I did next. The screen lit up with a notification. A message preview from someone saved as Aiden. Last. "Night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach twisted into a knot. My hand hovered over the phone, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it upstairs. I knew I had two choices: put the phone down and pretend I'd seen nothing, or dive headfirst into the truth I was too afraid to face. I swiped the notification open. The messages were like a punch to the gut. There were weeks' worth of conversations, each more damning than the last. Flirty banter turned into explicit exchanges, their words painting vivid pictures of nights I hadn't been a part of. Dates and times jumped out at me. Friday, when she said she was at her sister's. Tuesday, the late-night meeting, my gay. Hands shook as I scrolled, each new message another betrayal. Aiden wasn't just a fling. He was a pattern. A secret life she'd carefully curated while I was busy believing in us. When she came downstairs, wrapped in a towel and humming to herself, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, her phone lying face down in front of me. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing at the sight of me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, searching her face for the person I thought I knew. Finally, I managed to ask, "Who's Aiden?" Her expression froze, the color draining from her face. That single second of hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She didn't deny it. Not really. At first, she tried to deflect, claiming it was just flirting and nothing serious. But as I pressed her, her excuses crumbled, replaced by half-hearted apologies and the hollow refrain of, "I didn't mean to hurt you." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just the affair. It was the lies, the manipulation, the way she'd let me believe we were fine while she lived a double life. "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. She looked away, her arms crossed defensively. "A few months," she admitted. I left the house that day, needing space to think, to breathe. The world outside felt surreal, as though I'd stepped into someone else's life. People walked their dogs, children laughed in the park, couples strolled hand in hand, all of it a cruel reminder of what I thought I had. I spent hours sitting in my car, staring at the dashboard, trying to piece together how we'd gotten here. Had I missed the signs? Had I been too trusting? Or was this simply who she was all along? The questions were endless, and the answers were elusive. That night I returned home, not because I forgave her, but because I needed to face the wreckage head on. She was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I sat across from her at the dining table, the same table where we'd once shared so many meals, so many moments of laughter and connection. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this to us?" Her voice cracked as she tried to explain, but her words felt hollow, like they were meant more to absolve herself than to give me closure. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said. "I was unhappy. I felt invisible, like we were just going through the motions." Her words stung, but they also infuriated me. "So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to betray me?" She had no answer. Just tears and apologies that did little to ease the ache in my chest. By the end of that conversation, I knew one thing for certain. We couldn't go back. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. I told her I needed time, space, to figure out what came next. She begged me to stay, to give her another chance, but her pleas felt like too little, too late. As I packed a bag and walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. The life I thought I'd had was gone, but so was the weight of the lies. It was time to start over. Picking up the pieces, the first morning after I left, I woke up in a hotel room with beige walls, a too-soft mattress, and the sound of traffic filtering in through the window. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then it hit me like a freight train. My marriage was over, or at least the version of it I thought I had was. The first wave of emotion was rage, pure, blistering anger at her, at Aiden, at myself for not seeing it sooner. But when that subsided, I felt hollow, like I'd been carved out and left with nothing but an echo of who I used to be. I took a week off work. I told my boss I had personal issues to handle, and thankfully, she didn't pry. The truth was, I couldn't face anyone yet, not colleagues, not friends, not even my reflection in the mirror. I spent most of my time walking aimlessly around the city. Parks, coffee shops, libraries, places where I could blend in and disappear. I avoided the apartment we'd shared, the restaurants we used to frequent, the streets that felt haunted by her laughter. Every step felt heavy, like I was dragging the weight of my shattered trust behind me. It was on one of those walks that I found myself standing in front of a therapist's office. The sign on the door read, "Appointments available. Healing begins here." I don't know what compelled me to step inside. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the faint glimmer of hope that things could get better. Whatever it was, I found myself sitting across from a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patel, pouring out the story of my broken marriage. Her office was warm and inviting, filled with bookshelves and soft lighting. As I spoke, she listened without judgment, her eyes steady and compassionate. "It's okay to feel lost right now," she said after I'd finished. "You've been through a significant betrayal, and it's natural to question everything. But this pain doesn't have to define you. It's just one part of your story." Her words stayed with me long after I left. Therapy became a lifeline in the weeks that followed. Dr. Patel helped me unpack the anger, the grief, the confusion. She encouraged me to confront the hard truths about my marriage, the ways we'd grown distant, the red flags I'd ignored, the parts of myself I'd sacrificed to keep the peace. "It's not about blaming yourself," she said during one session. "It's about understanding how you got here so you can move forward with clarity." I started journaling, spilling my thoughts onto the page in messy, unfiltered scrawls. Writing became a way to make sense of the chaos in my mind, to untangle the knots of pain and doubt. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough from the memories of her to feel like a fresh start. The space was sparse, a couch, a bed, a table, but it was mine. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. At first, I was hesitant to share what had happened, fearing judgment or pity. But to my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms, offering support and laughter when I needed it most. I also discovered new passions, things I'd put on hold while trying to make my marriage work. I joined a local hiking group, spending weekends exploring trails and rediscovering the joy of nature. I even signed up for a cooking class, learning to create meals that nourished both my body and soul. Months passed, and slowly, the pain began to fade. It didn't disappear entirely. Scars don't work that way, but it no longer consumed me. I still thought about her sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the memories crept in uninvited. But those moments didn't hurt as much anymore. They were just reminders of a chapter I'd lived through, a chapter I'd survived. One evening, as I was tidying up my apartment, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sophia. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. For everything." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a response. "I appreciate your apology. I hope you find what you're looking for." And that was it. No anger, no bitterness, just closure. Life moved on. I wasn't the same person I'd been before the betrayal, but maybe that was a good thing. I'd learned to value myself, to set boundaries, to prioritize my own happiness. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. Finding new horizons, moving forward wasn't a straight line. It was a series of steps, some small, some hesitant, but all leading me to a version of myself I hadn't known before. It was a journey of self-discovery, and somewhere along the way, I began to feel alive again. It started with the little things. I signed up for an art class one evening on a whim. The flyer had caught my eye. Abstract painting, no experience necessary. I'd never considered myself creative, but there was something freeing about smearing colors onto a blank canvas with no rules to follow. It became my sanctuary, a space where I could let go of the weight I'd been carrying. Through the art class, I met a small group of people who'd become my friends. Among them was Claire, a woman in her mid-30s with a contagious laugh and an effortless way of making everyone feel at ease. Claire had her own story of heartbreak, a divorce after a decade of marriage, and we bonded over shared experiences. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the comfort of knowing someone else understood the road I was walking. We'd stay after class sometimes, sipping coffee at a nearby cafe and talking about everything from failed relationships to our favorite movies. Her company felt like a balm, a reminder that connection didn't have to come with strings attached. One evening, after weeks of friendship, Claire asked, "Do you ever think about dating again?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't let myself think about it, afraid of opening old wounds. "I don't know," I admitted. "It feels complicated." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It is, but it doesn't have to be. Scary. Sometimes it's just about taking a chance on something new." Her words lingered with me long after we parted ways that night. It was months before I felt ready to dip my toes back into the dating pool. At first, it was awkward. I wasn't sure how to navigate apps or small talk or the nuances of modern romance. But with time, I found myself enjoying the process. Each date was an opportunity to learn, not just about others, but about myself, what I wanted, what I valued, what I was willing to give, and what I needed in return. Claire and I stayed close, though our dynamic shifted as I began exploring new relationships. She was genuinely supportive, offering advice and encouragement without a trace of jealousy or judgment. "Whoever ends up with you is lucky," she told me one evening over coffee. "You're a good man, even if you don't see it yet." Her words struck a chord. For the first time in a long while, I began to believe they might be true. It wasn't until a year after leaving my marriage that I met someone who changed the trajectory of my life. Her name was Elena, a writer with a quick wit and a passion for storytelling. We met at a local book club, drawn together by a shared love of history and a mutual disdain for rushed endings. She was kind and intelligent, with a spark of curiosity that made every conversation feel electric. Our connection was slow and deliberate, built on honesty and mutual respect. There were no games, no hidden agendas, just two people learning how to trust again. One evening, as we walked along the riverbank under a canopy of stars, Elena asked me about my past. I hesitated, unsure of how much to share, but her eyes were steady and patient, free of judgment. "I've been through a lot," I said finally, "but it's taught me what I want and what I don't." She smiled softly. "And what do you want?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Honesty. Kindness. Someone who sees me for who I am and stays." Elena nodded, her hand brushing against mine. "That sounds like a good place to start. Our relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was real. It was built on open communication, shared dreams, and the understanding that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for each other, day after day." With Elena, I found something I hadn't thought possible after my marriage: peace. Looking back, I realized that the pain of my past hadn't broken me. It had reshaped me. It had taught me resilience, self-worth, and the courage to open my heart again. My journey wasn't about finding someone to complete me. It was about learning to stand on my own and recognizing that the right person would walk beside me, not ahead or behind. Elena became that person, but more importantly, I became someone I could be proud of. The growth of a new beginning. Elena and I continued to grow together, each day a step forward into a future neither of us could have predicted. Our relationship unfolded naturally, like a story we were both writing, each chapter an exploration of who we were, who we could be together, and how much we had to give to one another. We spent weekends visiting museums, going on spontaneous road trips, and sharing quiet dinners at home where our conversations would flow endlessly, sometimes about the trivial, sometimes about the profound. The more time we spent together, the more I found myself rediscovering pieces of myself I had long since abandoned. Elena had her own past, baggage she carried much like I did, but her openness about her own struggles and triumphs made me feel less like an outsider to my own heart. It was as if we were both learning how to trust again, how to let down the walls we had built in self-preservation. There were moments when I would look at her and realize just how far I had come. The scars from my marriage were still there, but they no longer controlled me. In the light of Elena's quiet acceptance, they simply became part of the tapestry of my life, woven into the person I had become, the person she was now choosing. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, Elena turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked, her voice soft. I leaned back in my chair, letting her question linger in the air between us. "I used to," I admitted. "I spent a lot of time wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have saved my marriage. But now—" I paused, searching for the right words. "Now I think about how far I've come, how much I've learned. I'm not that person anymore." Elena smiled, her hand reaching for mine. "I think you're exactly who you're meant to be," she said, quietly. Her words resonated deep within me. I had spent so long thinking about what was lost, but in that moment I realized how much I had gained. I wasn't the man I was when I walked away from my marriage, broken and lost. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, rediscovered my passions, and, most importantly, learned to trust in the love I had found with her. As the months passed, Elena and I moved forward, always with the understanding that our pasts were part of who we were, but they did not define us. We began discussing our future, slowly, carefully, looking at what we wanted from life, both as individuals and as a couple. There was no rush. We knew that the foundation we were building was steady, built on mutual respect and shared values. One night, after a particularly moving conversation about our dreams, Elena turned to me and asked, "What would your ideal future look like?" I smiled, realizing that I hadn't truly thought about it until that moment. But as I looked at her, the answer was simple. A future where we continue to grow, where we challenge each other but also cherish the quiet moments, where we travel, explore, and share everything together. Elena nodded, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and contentment. "I can see that." Our relationship wasn't without its challenges. There were still moments of uncertainty, still echoes of the past that crept into our conversations or actions. But they didn't carry the same weight they once had. With time, we learned to navigate those moments with patience and understanding, building our own narrative, one where trust, compassion, and laughter were the main themes. I came to realize that love wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and creating something new from the lessons we'd learned. With Elena, I wasn't trying to forget my past, but rather to honor it by being a better version of myself. Eventually, as we spent more time together, I started to see myself differently. I had once seen myself through the lens of my failed marriage, through the lens of betrayal, of hurt. But now, I was seeing myself as a man capable of love, of kindness, and of growth. Elena's presence in my life was a reflection of that transformation. The moment I knew I was truly ready to move forward, to take a step into a deeper commitment, came on a quiet night after a long day spent exploring a nearby vineyard. As we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. Elena's eyes widened in surprise as I opened it to reveal a simple silver ring. "I know we've taken things slowly," I said, my voice a little shaky with emotion, "but I can't imagine my future without you in it." Her smile was soft, but her eyes sparkled with something that felt like home. "Are you asking me?" I nodded. "Will you marry me?" It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was the most honest thing I could offer. It was a promise that the future we were building wasn't just a fleeting, the echoes of betrayal. A plan takes shape. The first days after I uncovered the truth about my wife's infidelity were a blur. Raw, unfiltered rage, followed by a deep sense of loss. I'd stumbled across the truth through an unexpected confrontation. With her phone, the one place where the facade of our marriage began to crumble. The evidence was damning, and as I stared at the messages, her words, her promises to someone else, the lies she had told me so casually, it was as though I could feel every ounce of trust and love we had built over the years slipping away from me. I wasn't a man who would have ever imagined myself seeking revenge. I had always been the calm, thoughtful one, careful not to let emotions drive my decisions. But in that moment, I was someone else, a man shattered by betrayal, consumed by a thirst for justice. At first, the desire for retribution was a flicker, almost an afterthought. I tried to drown it out, telling myself that revenge would only lower me to her level, that it would make me as dishonest as she had been. But as the days stretched on, the ache of her lies twisted into something darker, more potent. The small betrayals, her affairs, her lies, grew into a narrative I couldn't escape. My thoughts kept returning to how wrong it all felt, how she had toyed with my love, my trust, my commitment for so long. She thought she could get away with this. She thought I would never find out. And in that darkness, I began to plan. It wasn't about petty vengeance. It was about her knowing the full weight of what she had done, about giving her a taste of the anguish she had so casually inflicted on me. A cold, calculated kind of revenge, the kind that would make her regret ever underestimating my capacity for strength. I began with small, seemingly innocent acts. There was something symbolic in the way I took control over my life again, asserting a kind of power I had long felt I'd lost. Her favorite dress, the one she always wore on special occasions, disappeared from our closet one evening without a trace. I made sure she noticed its absence. Then, her most cherished necklace, something she had worn every day for years, was gone when she reached for it in the morning. I'd taken it, hidden it from her, as a reminder that there were consequences to her actions. She would never know when I might take something else from her, her safety, her comfort, her trust. But the true act of revenge would come later. It would be far more intricate, far more powerful. Days turned into weeks, and I watched as she began to unravel. The questions, the subtle probing. Where's my necklace? Have you seen my dress? Her worry was palpable, but she never suspected me. No, she believed she was the victim. She thought I had forgotten, that I had forgiven. But deep inside, I was watching her every move, analyzing her, waiting for the perfect moment. The final act was one that would take weeks to set up. I knew she had a secret meeting planned with her lover, one that she had been careful not to mention. She had become brazen over time, careless in her communication, thinking I would never catch on. The information had come to me in pieces, muted, conversations she thought I wouldn't overhear, fleeting exchanges that made my blood boil with every syllable. I fed into her complacency. Every evening I spent with her was a facade, a dance of casual affection that only deepened the complexity of my plan. I was no longer the man who had once loved her with all his heart. I was something darker, something more calculated. A man determined to expose her for the liar and the deceiver she had become. The night of her rendezvous arrived. I waited until she was gone, her clothes hastily thrown on in her rush to meet him. I could feel my pulse quicken, the anticipation, the need for closure. I had everything in place. I arrived at the location, standing at the edges of a small cafe, hidden in the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, and yet there was a strange sense of peace settling within me. I had planned every detail of this moment, and now, as I watched from a distance, I saw her, laughing with him, touching him, her eyes shining with the same allure she had once reserved for me. It was enough, more than enough, with calculated precision. I took out my phone and captured every moment. Every kiss, every stolen glance, every gesture that proved she was not the woman I had thought I married. The next morning, when she returned home, I was waiting for her. The silence between us was heavy, charged with something neither of us could escape. She stood in the doorway, her eyes flicking over to the spot where I sat, the shadows of the night still lingering between us. "You didn't go where you said you were going last night," I said, my voice low, controlled. Her gaze flickered, uncertainty creeping in, but she quickly regained composure. I stood up slowly, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. "I think you do. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." I pulled my phone from my pocket and showed her the pictures, the evidence of her betrayal laid bare before her. Her face went pale, her breath catching in her throat as the truth hit her. There were no words, no excuses she could make. It was all there, undeniable. Her betrayal, her lies, they had finally caught up with her. This wasn't about punishing her in the ways she might have expected. It wasn't about anger or chaos. No. It was about showing her the depth of the hurt she had caused, the consequences of her choices, not with a scene or a shouting match, but with the cold finality of truth. Revenge wasn't a moment of fury. It was a lesson in justice.